I paid for my younger sister's education while working 2 jobs, only to have her call me a loser at a family dinner. She had no idea that one sentence would be the moment I finally stopped paying her rent, and the moment everyone learned who had been financing the life she loved to brag about. When my younger sister Lauren got into her dream college, everyone in the family acted like she had won the lottery. My parents were glowing with pride. Lauren was already talking about the career she would have and the places she would travel after graduation. I stood a little apart, smiling because I was proud too, but quietly doing math in my head. Tuition, housing, books, food. My parents did not have the money. They never said it directly at first. Instead, my mother started dropping hints. "Lauren is so smart, but college is so expensive these days," she would say, always looking toward me at the end. I knew what that look meant. I was Lauren's older sister, the dependable one, the one who always seemed to find a way. I did not have much myself. I worked as a mechanic and had been trying to save for a down payment on a small house. But Lauren was my sister, and I told myself helping her was what family did. At first, it was small. I covered textbooks, then groceries, then part of her rent when my parents said they were short. After that came utilities and other emergencies. Somehow emergencies eventually included nights out because she needed to de-stress after exams. Every request came wrapped in the same promises. "I'll pay you back after I graduate. Mom and Dad can't help right now. It's just this once." It was never just once. What made it harder was the way my parents treated my help as an obligation instead of a sacrifice. "Family takes care of family," Dad would say, as if I was not already breaking my back to make the numbers work. I picked up a second job and started taking late shifts whenever I could. Some nights I came home, too tired to eat. Meanwhile, Lauren posted photos from expensive restaurants, weekend trips, rooftop bars, and trendy coffee shops, with captions about living my best life. I kept telling myself not to be petty. Maybe her friends were paying. Maybe college was supposed to be fun too. But every time one of those photos appeared, I felt a knot tighten inside me. I told myself it was temporary. Once she graduated, it would all be worth it. Maybe she would eventually understand what I was doing and show some gratitude. Instead, her entitlement grew. Designer handbags appeared. Trendy shoes. New clothes every few weeks. Things I could not justify buying for myself, even though I was the one working 2 jobs. When I finally asked how she was affording everything, she barely looked up from her phone. "Everyone at school dresses like that," she said. "I don't want to look like I don't fit in." There was no embarrassment in her voice. She spoke as if fitting in was automatically my financial responsibility. It was not only the money. Lauren had started treating me like a walking ATM. She rarely asked how I was. When she called, it was usually to complain about professors, roommates, assignments, or some expense she wanted covered. My parents were no better. Whenever I tried to explain that I was struggling, my mother shut me down. "She's your sister," she would say. "She's building a future. You should be proud to help her." Proud. My weekends disappeared. My savings disappeared. The house fund I had spent years building barely moved. Lauren's future was accelerating while mine sat in neutral, and somehow I was supposed to smile about it. The resentment I had been swallowing became impossible to ignore when Lauren called one evening and casually announced she was thinking about studying abroad for a semester. She did not ask whether I could afford it. She did not even ask whether I was willing to help. She spoke as if the decision had already been approved. "I think it would be such a great experience," she said brightly. "The program costs a little more, but it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing, right?" I sat on the edge of my bed, still wearing my work clothes, grease under my fingernails, gripping the phone so tightly my hand hurt. I could barely keep up with her normal expenses. Rent and utilities had gone up. I had started skipping lunches some days because $20 here and there actually mattered to me. And she was talking about a semester overseas like she was asking me to pick up milk. I did not explode. I told her I would think about it, and ended the call before my anger spilled out. The next day, I went to my parents hoping they would finally tell her no. Instead, my mother smiled. "This is an incredible opportunity," she said. You'll figure it out. You always do. That sentence changed something in me. Not completely, but enough that I finally heard what they were really saying. They did not see my second job, my missing savings, my exhaustion, or the future I had postponed. They saw a resource. Someone who would always figure it out so nobody else had to. Lauren got worse after that. She complained that her roommate borrowed her shoes and that the cafeteria did not have real lattes. She joked that I was married to my job and laughed about how I was always working. One night, during a break, I vented to a coworker who had watched me take extra shifts for months. She looked at me and said, "She doesn't appreciate you. You bend over backward, and she acts like you owe her." For the first time, I did not defend Lauren. I did not say she was young or stressed. I just sat there because part of me already knew my coworker was right. A few days later, my parents invited me over for a family dinner because Lauren was home from school for a break. I almost said no. I was exhausted and tired of pretending everything was normal, but I went anyway, telling myself I could survive a few hours. I had no idea that by the end of that dinner, Lauren would say the one thing that would finally make me stop paying for everything. Family dinner was supposed to be casual, but the second I walked through my parents' front door, I could already feel myself slipping back into the role they had assigned me years ago, the reliable daughter who never needed anything and somehow always had enough to give. Mom was hovering around Lauren asking about classes. Dad wanted to hear about her professors, and Lauren sat at the table soaking up every ounce of attention like she had returned from some heroic expedition instead of college. I took my usual seat and waited. I kept thinking maybe someone would ask how work was going, whether I was still doing those brutal late shifts, whether I had made any progress toward the house I had been saving for. Nobody did. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Somehow every conversation curved back toward Lauren. I ate quietly and told myself not to care because caring was exactly what had exhausted me for years. Halfway through dinner, Lauren brought up the study abroad program again. Her entire face lit up as she described the cities she could visit, the classes she could take, the weekend trips she and her friends were already planning. Mom listened like Lauren was describing an inevitable chapter in some glorious future. Dad nodded approvingly. Then Lauren looked directly at me, smiled, and said, "Hope you're ready for a little extra work, big sister. These programs don't come cheap." She laughed. Mom actually smiled. Dad kept eating. I froze with my fork halfway to my mouth because suddenly I understood that nobody at that table thought she was joking. Lauren genuinely believed my second job existed to finance whatever experience she decided she deserved next. I put my fork down carefully. "Maybe you should get a part-time job," I said. I deliberately kept my voice light because some stupid part of me was still trying to avoid a scene. Lauren stared at me for a second before laughing. "Me? A part-time job? That's funny. I'm too busy with school." She said it so casually that something inside me finally snapped into focus. I looked at her expensive clothes, the phone I had helped replace when hers mysteriously broke, the manicured nails, the careless expression of someone who had never once wondered what happened when money ran out. "You're joking, right?" I asked. "You honestly think I'm going to keep funding your lifestyle forever while you do absolutely nothing to help yourself?" The room went silent so quickly I could hear the refrigerator humming from the kitchen. Lauren's expression hardened. "What is your problem?" she snapped. "You've always been so bitter. Just because your life isn't going anywhere doesn't mean you have to take it out on me." For a second, I could not breathe. After all the money I had sent, all the overtime I had worked, every weekend I had sacrificed, and every plan I had postponed, that was what she thought of me. Not generous, not exhausted, not someone who had carried her for years. A loser whose life was going nowhere. I felt the heat rush into my face, but instead of yelling, I became strangely calm. "You think my life isn't going anywhere?" I asked. Lauren rolled her eyes. I leaned forward. "Lauren, my life hasn't gone anywhere because I've been too busy funding yours." Mom immediately jumped in. "That is completely inappropriate." Her voice had the sharp warning tone she had used on me since childhood whenever I challenged the family hierarchy. She is your sister. Supporting her is what you're supposed to do. I stared at her. Supposed to do? I repeated. When exactly did it become my responsibility to work 2 jobs so Lauren could have designer clothes and expensive dinners? When did it become my responsibility to give up buying a house so she could go overseas because everyone else at school is doing it? Dad told me I was being dramatic. Mom insisted I was exaggerating. Lauren folded her arms and smirked. There it is, she muttered. The martyr routine. That sentence ended whatever hesitation I had left. I pushed my chair back and stood. Fine. If I'm such a martyr, then you won't need my money anymore. Lauren's smirk disappeared. I looked straight at her. I'm done paying your rent. I'm done paying your utilities. I'm done covering tuition, groceries, nights out, emergencies, and whatever else you decide you deserve. Starting tonight, you pay for your own life. Nobody moved. Lauren's face slowly went pale. You can't do that, she said. For the first time all evening, there was fear in her voice. How am I supposed to live? I picked up my jacket. Figure it out. I've been doing that for years. Maybe it's time you learned. Mom called my name sharply, but I walked out before they could drag me into another lecture about responsibility. The moment I got into my car, my hands started shaking. I sat behind the wheel without starting the engine, staring at my parents' house while anger, guilt, and relief crashed into each other inside me. Part of me expected to turn around. That was what I had always done, get angry, calm down, apologize, then transfer the money anyway. But this time I drove home. By the next morning, my phone was exploding. Lauren started with passive-aggressive texts. Thanks for ruining dinner. Then, hope you feel good about leaving your own sister out to dry. When I ignored those, the guilt trips arrived. You're really going to abandon me after everything I've been through? I almost laughed at that one. Everything she had been through had apparently happened while I was paying the bills. Mom called next. I don't know what has gotten into you, she said. Lauren needs your help. I finally stopped trying to sound polite. She has had my help for years. She has had my paycheck, my weekends, and my savings. Now she can help herself. Dad called later and accused me of punishing Lauren for no reason. What is she supposed to do now? He demanded. Get a job, I said. Like everybody else. He went silent for a second, as if employment were some outrageous punishment I had invented specifically for his youngest daughter. Then came another lecture about selfishness and family loyalty. I ended the call before he finished. A few days later, Lauren's landlord called me. Apparently, she had given him my number because I had been the person making her rent payments. The payment had not arrived, and he wanted to know when I planned to send it. Hearing him ask me, that was almost surreal. I'm not responsible for Lauren's rent anymore, I told him. You need to speak with her. He sounded confused, but I repeated myself until he understood. That call must have terrified Lauren because 3 days later she appeared at my apartment without warning. When I opened the door, she looked completely different from the confident woman who had mocked me at dinner. Her hair was messy, there were dark circles under her eyes, and panic had replaced the arrogance in her expression. You can't just cut me off, she said immediately. Yes, I replied, leaning against the doorframe. I can. Her voice rose. If you don't help me, I'm going to lose my apartment. Mom and Dad don't have room for me. Not my problem. Lauren stared at me like I had slapped her. Not your problem? You're my sister. I nodded. And for years, I've been more than that. I've been your bank account, your safety net, and your excuse not to grow up. I worked 2 jobs while you lived, like money magically appeared every month. Then the one time I asked you to take responsibility, you called me a failure. Her face shifted. I didn't mean it like that. I was angry. You weren't angry until I suggested you get a job, I said. You meant exactly what you said. You just never expected there to be consequences. Then Lauren started crying. Big, desperate sobs that would have broken me a month earlier. Please, she said, I can't do this on my own. I watched her and realized That was precisely the problem. Nobody had ever made her do anything on her own. Then learn, I told her. Get a job, cut your spending, talk to financial aid, find roommates, sell some of the things you bought while I was skipping meals. Do whatever the rest of us do when money gets tight. Her sadness instantly turned back into anger. You're being cruel. Family is supposed to help family. I looked at her for a long moment. Family supports each other. They don't drain one person dry and call it love. Lauren opened her mouth to argue again, but I had nothing left to hear. Until you understand that, don't come back asking me for money. Then I closed the door. I stood there afterward with my hand still resting on the lock, listening to her footsteps disappear down the hallway. For the first time in years, I did not feel like Lauren's older sister, my parents' emergency fund, or the person responsible for keeping everyone comfortable. I simply felt like myself, but I also knew Lauren would not accept losing control quietly. If she could no longer get money from me, she would find another way to make me pay, and by the next morning, my entire family had begun choosing sides. By the next morning, my parents had apparently decided that Lauren showing up at my apartment crying was proof that I had become some kind of monster. Mom called first, furious before I could even say hello. How could you do that to your own sister? She demanded. She came home devastated. She's scared she's going to lose everything. I stood in my kitchen listening to her while making coffee before another shift, and something about the contrast almost made me laugh. Lauren was losing everything, because she might have to give up an apartment she never paid for, while nobody had cared that I had spent years losing weekends, savings, sleep, and any realistic chance of buying the house I wanted. She's been living off my paycheck for years, I said. If having to support herself feels like a crisis, maybe that tells you how bad this became. Dad joined the campaign later that afternoon, calling me heartless and accusing me of tearing the family apart over money. I reminded him that nobody had called it just money when they wanted mine every month. Lauren responded differently. Instead of calling me again, she took the fight online. Suddenly, her social media filled with vague posts about betrayal, selfish relatives, and learning who really loves you when life gets hard. She never mentioned that the hard life she was describing included years of rent, tuition, groceries, clothes, dinners, and utilities paid by someone else. Then she went even further and created a fundraiser. The description claimed she had been blindsided by an unexpected financial emergency and was in danger of losing her apartment while trying to continue her education. There was no mention of me. No explanation that the unexpected emergency was simply her older sister refusing to keep paying for everything. Her friends filled the comments with sympathy, but sympathy apparently did not translate into much money. People offered hearts, prayers, and messages telling her she was strong. Very few offered cash. The story spread through my extended family almost immediately. Cousins I had not spoken to in years started messaging me. An aunt called and told me I should reconsider because family comes first. Normally, I would have swallowed the criticism. This time, I asked one simple question. How much do you think I've been paying? She hesitated. I told her. Tuition, rent, utilities, food, textbooks, emergency expenses, extra money for nights out, years of it. Then I explained the 2 jobs, the house savings, and Lauren's study abroad expectation. My aunt became quiet. She expected you to pay her rent this whole time? She finally asked. Welcome to my life, I said. That conversation repeated itself several times. The people who had been criticizing me had heard Lauren's version first. Once they heard the entire story, their outrage became noticeably less enthusiastic. Eventually, the deadline Lauren kept threatening me with actually arrived. I heard through a mutual friend that she had lost the apartment and moved back in with our parents. I felt something twist inside me when I heard it, not guilt exactly, but the lingering instinct to rescue her. For years, any sign that Lauren was uncomfortable had triggered the same response in me. Fix it. Send money. Pick up another shift. Make the problem disappear. I had to remind myself that she was not homeless. She was living with our parents. She had food, a bedroom, transportation, and every opportunity to find work. The disaster was not that Lauren had nowhere to go. The disaster, from her perspective, was that she was finally living within limits. Even moving home did not seem to teach her much. A friend who still spoke to Lauren told me she complained constantly about my parents' house. The meals were boring. The internet was slow. The bedroom was too small. Mom did not buy the coffee she liked. At one point, Lauren supposedly joked that my parents should hire someone to cook and clean because she was too busy studying to deal with house stuff. When my friend told me that, I actually laughed. It was not funny, but it was so perfectly Lauren that I could not help it. She had lost the apartment and still somehow believed the real injustice was that everyone around her was failing to provide a sufficiently comfortable replacement. Her social life began changing too. The same friends who appeared constantly in her restaurant photos stopped appearing once expensive dinners, and weekend trips disappeared. Invitations slowed. People who had always been available when Lauren could split large tabs or when I was unknowingly covering her share suddenly became busy. Her fundraiser stalled almost completely. Without the lifestyle she had built using my money, Lauren discovered that some of the relationships surrounding that lifestyle were just as shallow as the image itself. I would like to say that realization humbled her, but from everything I heard, she blamed me instead. In her version, I had not merely stopped paying her bills. I had destroyed her friendships, damaged her education, humiliated her publicly, and forced her back into our parents' house. Personal responsibility still had not entered the story. Meanwhile, something strange was happening to me. My bank account stopped bleeding. At first, I did not even notice because I had become so accustomed to seeing money disappear the moment I earned it. Then one payday arrived, and there was no rent transfer for Lauren, no utility payment, no emergency request, no message beginning with, "I hate asking, but," for the first time in years, a meaningful part of my paycheck stayed mine. I reduced some of the extra shifts. I started eating proper meals again, instead of grabbing whatever was cheapest between jobs. I reopened the savings account I had once labeled house and began putting money into it. Watching that balance rise felt almost unreal. Lauren had called me a failure because my life was going nowhere, but the cruel irony was that the second I stopped financing hers, mine finally began moving again. Then came the phone call that exposed exactly how little my parents had learned. Dad called one evening sounding genuinely panicked. Lauren had gotten access to one of their credit cards and run the balance almost to the limit. Shopping, food deliveries, clothes, and other purchases had piled up faster than they realized. Whether they had explicitly allowed her to use the card or simply trusted her with the information hardly mattered by then. The debt existed, and they could not comfortably make the payments. Mom got on the phone and immediately started talking about how serious the situation was. Then came the sentence I had been expecting without knowing I was expecting it. "We need you to help us." I stared at the wall for a few seconds before answering. Months earlier, those words would have sent me searching through my accounts to see how much I could transfer. This time, they only made the entire pattern painfully obvious. "No," I said. Mom went silent. Dad asked what I meant. "I mean, I'm not paying Lauren's credit card debt. You defended her. You told me I was cruel for making her responsible for herself. You chose to keep supporting the same behavior after I stopped. Now you're dealing with what I dealt with for years." Mom insisted this was different because their credit was at risk. "My future was at risk too," I replied. "None of you cared when it was mine." For once, they had no convincing response. Dad muttered something about family helping each other, but even he sounded tired saying it. I reminded him that helping somebody through a crisis was not the same as repeatedly protecting them from consequences they created themselves. Lauren had never needed rescuing from bad luck. She had needed boundaries. Every time someone removed those boundaries, her behavior got worse. "This is your mess now," I told them. "You wanted to prove I was wrong. Handle it without my paycheck." I ended the call expecting another wave of relatives and accusations. Strangely, It never came. Maybe my parents were embarrassed. Maybe they finally understood. Or maybe they simply realized there was no longer any point pressuring someone who had learned how to say no. That became the last major conversation I had with them for a long time. I focused on work, savings, and the pieces of my life I had neglected while acting as Lauren's private financial system. It took time to recover. Years of sacrifice did not disappear because I finally stopped making new sacrifices. But slowly, the anger became less important than the freedom. I no longer woke up wondering what unexpected bill Lauren would send me. I no longer felt guilty for buying something for myself. I no longer had to explain why my own future deserved a place in my budget. Every month that passed without rescuing someone else made it clearer how deeply I had been conditioned to believe that being a good daughter and sister meant making myself smaller so everyone else could live bigger. The last I heard, Lauren was still living with our parents. She was still finding reasons why things were unfair, still talking about the opportunities other people had supposedly taken from her, and still expecting life to become easier without changing much herself. Part of me felt sorry for her. An even smaller part felt sorry for my parents, because they were now living every day with the entitlement they had spent years encouraging. But I did not feel responsible anymore. They had called me selfish, bitter, heartless, and a failure because I finally stopped sacrificing myself for Lauren. Yet cutting her off turned out to be the first truly responsible thing I had done for any of us. Lauren finally had to face the cost of her own choices. My parents finally had to experience the consequences of enabling her, and I finally got my life back. They had spent years telling me that family takes care of family. What I eventually learned was that sometimes taking care of yourself means refusing to let family destroy you.